Maria, welcome to Seeing Other People. It is such an honor to have you here. I feel like this is an episode that is so long overdue, but it's not like saving the best for last, but we saved the best. And here it is.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. That I feel, wow. Okay. That's like crazy to me that you're saying all these things. That's really nice of you. And thank you so much.
Of course. It really is so great to have you here. I want to kind of just get started by backtracking and, catching everyone who doesn't know up to speed on who you are and what you do and how you really got started being a matchmaker.
Right. Well, the short story is that I'm a fourth generation matchmaker. So my grandmother, her mother, her grandmother are all matchmakers. And what that really means is that they were just the community leaders of their little villages. They made the best coffee. They held the best gossip. And, they would advise what people should do, for their own communities. So yeah, that's the short story. I think we can wrap it up. We can go. No, I'm just kidding. The long story though, in terms of like modernizing matchmaking, because I don't live in a tiny village on an island in Greece. I thought I would go into the foreign service. I got a bachelor's in international business and European affairs. I enrolled into my master's program in global affairs with a concentration in economics. My first job post undergrad was at the U.S. Embassy in Athens. Like I really thought I was going to go into the foreign service. And, naturally, I've always been a connector. And, upon moving to New York City to pursue my graduate studies, and I was working a full-time corporate job too. So it was a lot of juggling. I thought like, how am I going to get a job in foreign service if I don't know anyone here? I know I'll start like a networking event. Like I'll do something where I can meet other people. And this was kind of piggybacking off of a friend of mine who was in marketing, who they would do, I believe it was called First Wednesdays. And it was at the W Hotel, and like all of these marketing people would show up on First Wednesdays to just network with each other. I'm like, well, we need this for the international relations community. And so Twitter was also like pretty hot. Foursquare was really hot. Foursquare had just come out. And so I started this hashtag called NYCIR, which I know in 2022, it's like, what do you mean start a hashtag? Like that doesn't make sense. But at that time, creating a hashtag out of thin air in 2008 was like, it was a big deal, right? It was like, I've decided to think of this as a folder, and now you're going to join my folder. It was a very, new time in social media, I think. Anyway,
definitely ahead of your time. Yes.
Yeah. And it was different because I remember telling people like, don't you want to network with other people so that, because I think in New York City, you're surrounded by people who, are in the financial services or in marketing or in PR or in fashion. And yes, we have the UN in Manhattan, but no one thinks about like, or we have all these consulates in Manhattan, but no one's like thinking about like, how do we turn this into something? So I was like, okay, listen, we're going to do wine events every other Thursday or every Thursday. I forget now. Maybe it was every Thursday, but it'll be a wine event at the Roger Smith Hotel, which was like in walking distance from the UN and a lot of consulates, because it was like where Midtown East meets the Upper East Side sort of area. And sure enough, like professors from the universities that were in international relations would come, people from the consulate would come, people from the UN would come, and it was great. And eventually that, you're thinking like, okay, how does that turn into matchmaking? Well, in one of those first events, I introduced someone to someone, and I've always been that kind of person too, who would like meddle with people. In fact, a friend of mine, they just celebrated their 10-year anniversary, but I remember he sat next to me in my corporate job, and his name was, okay, let me not use his real name. Let's say his name was Brian Jessica. And that's actually a pretty accurate first and last name that he has. He has like a male first name and like a female
last name.
Right. So his name was Brian Jessica. So I was like, I wonder if there's any Jessica Bryans we could set you up with. And I went on Facebook and I found a Jessica Bryan who worked like 2 buildings over, and I forced them to go on like 2 dates.
No way.
Absolutely. Obviously they didn't work out, but I thought it would have been really funny if she got married to him and it was like Jessica. Like, anyway, dreams. So then, but yeah, that's what happened. And like someone got married and like very quickly, And I was always meddling. I've always like matched people. My first match was in kindergarten. Between let's call her Jessica and him Brian, and they dated until the day of our prom, which is where they broke up.
Wow.
So I've always been doing that, right? And then that NYCIR thing happens, and someone at the wedding's like, "Oh, if you want to meet someone, go to Maria. She knows everybody." And I was like, "Wait, okay, we could probably, maybe this is
There's
something."
something here. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a year later, so this was in 2008 and 2009. Like it just kind of snowballed into this something really big. And then 17 magazine gave me like a little editorial, like it just like small things started becoming big things. And now in 2022, it's, it's a much bigger operation, right? We have a matchmaking program, a coaching program. I have several employees. We host retreats. My social media is its own animal. So there's a lot of things happening, 14 years later.
All because you started
that's a long story.
No, I'm so glad you told the long story because there's so much in there that is like inspiring. And it's something that, people always ask like, Alana, how do I meet people in real life? How do I meet people in real life? And it's like, everybody should be looking out to set their friends up and the people that they know up with other people they know. Like, I really believe that we're all like 1 or 2 degrees away from the person that we're going to end up with. Like,
I agree.
There's somebody out there that if only they took a few minutes to think like, oh, who would you be a good match with? Like, we could be meeting so many more people.
And I want to add 2 things to this. The first thing I want to add is that, Foursquare coming out when it did, and I know this app, I don't think it even exists, but if it does, my apologies to Dev and Naveen, but or was it Dan and Naveen? I forget their names. But when that app came out, that is when Matchmaker Maria started kind of forming. And what I would do back then, now in 2009, is I would use the app to see, okay, where is the happening place? Because Foursquare came out before Facebook created location check-in.
Got it. Yeah. And for people who don't know, Foursquare is if you go to a place, you basically check in that you're there and it shares it to
everyone,
other people who are there, and B, also your network can see where you are.
Exactly. And at that time, Foursquare for New Yorkers was more popular than Facebook. Facebook was a place to post the photos after the party. Foursquare is where you checked in. And there was like, you'd become the mayor of something. It was very popular. So by naming myself Matchmaker Maria, by having a photo of me, being like kind of funny, people would come up to me at parties like, "Are you Matchmaker Maria?" And I'm like, "Yes." They're like, "Who are you going to match with?"
Make
like
me
I was able to create like a network, right? But then, and the second thing I want to say here too is that in what you said, right, I do believe that for a lot of people, you are 1 or 2 degrees away from your match. I 100% agree with you. I don't agree with how most people approach their friends in matching them. So what usually will happen is someone will say, "Hey, do you know anyone that's single? I need you to match me." And
it's too broad. It's not
that's
helpful.
way too broad. I'll tell you what I did, and it worked for me. I thought about who is friends with the person that I want to be with. Who is that person? Because, I believe birds of a feather flock together. And I could think of 2 people at that time that was like, they're definitely friends with the guy that I'm dating, a guy that I should be dating. Mm-hmm. So I went up to both of them and I said, next time you go out with your friends, I need you to invite me.
I love that.
And 8 days later, one of them is like, "Listen, I'm going to be hanging out with my friends in Boston. You told me to tell you." And he's like, "Okay, yeah, I got it. I'm going to be on an Amtrak. I'm coming to Boston." And I met 9 of his friends. Half of them were in relationships. They were there with their girlfriends. That's okay. I didn't say anything like that. But you know what? The other guys, they were not in relationships. And one of them I didn't know that was going to happen at the time.
Right.
But, one of them ended up being my husband. And what's funny about that scenario too is that in the entire Amtrak ride up, not once did it ever cross my mind that like I'm about to enter a long distance relationship with someone. Like I was just like, find the guy and you're just like, "No, I'm going.
Later. I want to meet someone. Whatever happens.
Yeah, whatever happens." But you know what? I think sometimes we restrict ourselves to like this geographic. It's a very arbitrary zip code thing, and it's like, well, no. What if that guy's the guy, and you just have to learn how to make it work?
Yeah, and if you're quote unquote meant to be together, like if it can work and you both want it to work enough, you'll find a way. You will find a way. And you know what? We both prioritized our jobs at the time where we couldn't move. So at the time we thought, oh, this will be long distance for 18 months. It would end up being 6 years. Wow.
I mean, he would come down, like we had in that period, we got engaged, we got married, we got pregnant. I mean, I got pregnant and then we had a baby and then I had my son for 10 months, half the week by myself. So he would come down Thursday and go back on Sunday. But we figured it out. We made it work. Um, you know, it was hard, but we made it work.
You wanted it to work and you found a way. I don't, everyone
Yeah.
here right now listening is thinking, oh, if he wanted to, he would. No, it's like they both wanted to.
We both have to. And you know, that's also the other thing. Like if you, oh God, don't even get me started on that phrase. I don't know if I agree with it.
We could go off for hours.
That phrase only makes sense if it's a guy that's your fuck buddy.
Yeah.
Like that's the only time you can say if you want to. Yeah, exactly. If he wanted to date you, he would be dating you, but he's not dating you. You're a fuck buddies. That's okay. Yep. You know, embrace. And then you move on. Like the whole like, well, if he wanted to, he'd be texting you. I'm like, you know, yeah, I suppose, but also, you know, you can also control your future. You can also give people opportunities to like have to message you back. And like people are nervous. People get scared. I don't know. It takes a lot of courage to date.
It absolutely does. But we do love to make excuses for other people's behavior. What, you know, in terms of, okay, I love what you said about instead of just saying like, set me up, like invite me. That way you can make your own connections. I think that is so important and something that I hope people can, you know, challenge themselves. Maybe by the end of the year, you'll do that once. Like there'll be a lot of holiday parties coming up. New Year's
December
stuff,
is the month. December is the month. Like so many relationships start in December because it's again, what you said, that 1-2 degree connection. Like you're going to go to holiday parties. You need to show up. And you know what else? When you tell people like, set me up, you know what they always say? I don't have any friends that are single. You don't know that. Yeah. You don't know. You can't possibly know that not all of your friends are in relationships.
Every single person you know.
Every single one.
Right.
Wow. Right. Okay.
What about like a friend of a friend? You know, I have a friend who I've been wanting to find someone for her, and a mutual friend of ours and I were, you know, sitting at the dinner table and we're like, okay, between both of our networks, we have to know, like, there are people out there. Let's figure out who could make sense. But an embarrassing, you know, question. I feel like I'm outing myself a little here. I have never successfully set someone up. And I've tried very hard.
That's okay. The fact that you're trying, it gives people, you know, every person's a person closer to your person. So you just help people get closer to their person. That is true. But what, you know, before this was really your job, when you were kind of just doing it like, oh, let me see if I can put you and you together. Like, what were certain things that you were looking for? Oh, okay. So ultimately, and I still do this, like I try to see if the core values are aligned. And some of that has to do with like maybe your relationship with the faith that you may have been raised into or not raised into. What kind of family values, you know, does your family value or does your culture value? You can, you know, that I think that has always been like a big part of like a foundation. And then after that, it's okay, how much does our lifestyle align? And lifestyle is, you know, how do you value the way you spend your time? Plus, how do you value the way you spend your money? So that's not necessarily to say like, oh, if I make $500,000 and he needs to make $500,000. Right. No, there are plenty of people who make a lot of money who are awful spenders, or who don't, you know, or maybe they don't share in the lifestyle that you want. Maybe you want an equal partner if you decide to grow a family, and someone who's making a really, really, really big income just can't sacrifice time away from work to do that for you. So you have to find that balance, and you know that you already know what balance you might already want. So from there, it's like, okay, what lifestyle does this person want in their future? And then we try to align that with what other people are looking for. So, you know, these are usually the things that, you know, we look at. And then of course we look at other things for long-term compatibility, but those are the two big ones, like core values and lifestyle. That's pretty big. And I think for me,
if you don't have those, then it's never going to work.
Yeah. And also, you know, you can be with someone who shares in your core values and shares in your lifestyle. And that's most people that you date will have the, you know, if you're not talking to, but like dating, will have those things. After that now is like, are they emotionally well? Are you emotionally well? Like, how does this relationship function? Because for a lot of breakups, it's not for lack of core values or lifestyle, it might be that you're just not a functioning relationship, and then you should break up. So I want to give a shout out to all of my ex-boyfriends for teaching me that.
Yeah, there have definitely been a lot of times where, I thought I was ready to be in a relationship and I dated somebody who, again, like core values and all that was completely aligned, but I was actually not in a good place. And
Right.
I don't think there was any single person that I would have been able to make it work with because I was just not there.
I mean, scarcity mindset is a bitch, and that's what usually happens, right? It's like we'll lower our standards because it's like, oh God, I don't want to be single for this, or like, you know what, I just broke up with someone and I need to feel pretty about myself. So we look for the low hanging fruit. And look, these are normal experiences to have. Like these are growth experiences, but they're just a part of dating, and I think dating sometimes gets a bad rap because of that. When you just have to kind of separate, the method of dating from like the experience.
Yeah. I want to talk about, obviously, we're talking a lot about like kind of compatibility. I want to discuss compatibility versus chemistry because I think a lot of times the lines get blurred. And I also think a lot of times people are putting maybe too much emphasis on the wrong thing.
Right.
So I guess my first question in that is, in your experience, do you find that people are looking for the wrong things, whether it's like what their checklist is or how they feel after that first date?
So I think for a lot of people, the picker is broken. And I know this because we have an entire coaching program that's like to help fix your picker, called the Agape Intensive. And that's quite literally the purpose of it, is like understanding chemistry and compatibility, and removing the self-sabotaging beliefs and triggers that come with dating experiences. So I certainly believe that the picker is broken, and it's broken because it's never been reevaluated or even evaluated, right? The last time you may have decided, like, what am I looking for? It was maybe when you were 18, and maybe again after a bad breakup when you were 25. And that's normal. That's totally okay. But the problem with not evaluating it is that we tend to convince ourselves, like, well, I'll know he's the guy when I see it. And it's like, well, that method doesn't really work for most people. And yes, dating is like 90% luck, but how can we increase your chance of success? How can I set you up for success by, making sure that when luck comes around, you're available, you're able to depict, like, is this person the right person? There has to be also favorable odds of you making it work. So, you asked about chemistry, right? I think that's something that's like a word that people say. I hear it all the time. I've set up over 5,000 first dates, and it's the most common word as to why someone doesn't go on a second date, which is like, I just didn't feel chemistry. And I will accept that as a reason. But it's when they use the word spark that throws me off. So let's talk about the 3 words, because I didn't mention one of them. It's going to be the word I put in. You have spark and chemistry. And the third word I'm going to tell you is vibe. So the spark on a date, people are looking for the spark. The spark is a nice word for anxiety. Anytime you're looking for a spark, it's making someone like, am I getting the dopamine rush of being uncertain on a date? Oh, is it happening? Okay, did it happen? Do you think he's going to call me tomorrow? He seems really great. How long before we go on a date again? I just told him I had a really good time. Why hasn't he said, let's do it again? Like, this creates spark. It's an interest. It's rooted in anxiety.
And we think we want it so badly. We think it feels so good, but it's not. I mean, the number of times I left dates feeling like that and became obsessed with the person.
Yeah.
And it wasn't
exactly
because
what they
I
were
liked
on
them.
Halloween in 2016. Like, I know what you did. I know exactly what you did. Everyone does the same thing.
Yep.
They Google, they find the LinkedIn photo, they go through their private account. Women will pay for premium just to make sure that he doesn't know you went through their LinkedIn profile. Then you went on Glassdoor to see how much they make. Then you went through their Instagram. Then you found their Halloween photos from 2016. Then you saw who their friends were tagged. Like, I know exactly what everyone does, right? And the fact that you're smiling and nodding means that I'm not far off. So spark is bullshit, as Logan Ury would say, who's the chief relationship scientist at Hinge. You're a Hinge alumni, right? Am I like?
I am a Hinge alumni, yes.
And I think that's what she said, right? I believe she said spark is bullshit, and I agree with her. Like, the spark. The spark is not. The spark is anxiety. That's all it is. All right. The next word is chemistry. I believe in chemistry. So here's what there's two ways to look at chemistry. There's a way to look at it literally and figuratively. And when people say chemistry on a date, they mean it figuratively. So literally, if you were to ask me about long-term compatibility, I would tell you that that's rooted in literal chemistry. So what is your temperament like? And what kind of temperament is a good match for you? And temperament, it's designed to your own temperament. That's your genetic code that tells your personality if you're going to be a person that takes risks or does to-do lists in their head or likes a process or enjoys rules or doesn't like rules or leads life with a sense of pleasure. Like there's all these ways that temperament molds our personality. So that's the chemistry literal version, but let's talk about chemistry, the figurative version that people tend to talk about on a date. So I'm going to take it back to my roots. I'm Greek. My company's name is Agape Match. Agape is a word for love in Greek. It's one of our many words. And agape, Aristotle defined it as the soul's recognition of another soul. So let's take it the opposite way. Let's talk about anti-agape. Have you ever met someone on a date where you were just like, they were perfect on paper, you were really excited, but then you met them and you were like, oh no. And there was nothing you could say. Like, it wasn't like, oh, he's a bad person. Just the vibe was off, right?
Just not there. Yeah.
It's just not there, right? So I think when people talk about chemistry on dates, what they're really talking about is vibe. And I think that this is the one woo-woo thing I believe in. But I do believe that the universe has a way of telling you, like, this ain't it. And your intuition has to be sensitive enough to listen to it. And also you have to believe it. And so, when someone says to me, there was just no chemistry, the way I translate it, there was no vibe. And in knowing that, okay, Agape's definition is the soul's recognition of another soul. So I know that. The anti-agape here is that my soul is not supposed to know that person's soul. I'm not supposed to know them. And this has happened to me like multiple times, even as a matchmaker. Like to this day, I will meet people and I'll be like, I'm not supposed to match you. I'm not supposed to know you. I'm not supposed to match you. Like there is something off. And that's nothing, there's nothing wrong with them. Sometimes I'll even redirect them to another matchmaker. I'll be like, I'm not the right matchmaker. You should work with them. Right. Because I need to make sure that we're a match, right? So when I think of chemistry, I think of vibe. When I think of vibe, I think of soul recognition. So it is perfectly normal to see someone that's perfect on paper and then meet them and be like, we just didn't have chemistry. That is a normal dating experience. You're not supposed to have chemistry with every person you meet. That would be exhausting. And there's just not enough room and bandwidth for that, right?
Totally. Yeah. It's funny. I'm thinking about like a job interview almost, and you get to like that last round and then you don't get the job. And I've been on both sides of it. And sometimes like 2 people or 3 people can, when you're interviewing, like can be equally skilled, equally qualified. And the vibe is just a little bit better with one person and the team. And it's like, okay, this is the person that we're going to bring on because it's, a culture fit or because there's something there that we just feel really drawn to. That doesn't mean that the other 2 people who made it to the final round weren't good enough. They just weren't the one that in that moment you decide to move forward with. Well,
and you just used the example of teams, right? And like work structure. And, what a lot of these personality tests that you take at work, be it a DISC assessment or a Kolbe assessment, Kolbe, these things calculate your temperament and what you would be like in a group environment. So, that vibe is also looking at compatibility with the overall group too. You don't want to put people in a scenario where they, even though they could possibly work together, they can't agree with each other, or they don't, yes, dating and finding a job are very, very alike in their methodology.
Yeah. You got the resume, you got the profile. There is a lot in common.
Yeah.
So, okay. What do you think people should be placing more emphasis on then? Is it compatibility, or is it that feeling of, okay, our vibe is right?
The vibe is just the first date, right? Like that's so, you can have a vibe with really great people that are actually really bad for you. And in fact, you can have a vibe with people that are awful, not even great people. They could be a narcissistic abuser who's learned how to vibe to manipulate you. So that is just a gut check that happens on the first date. After that, we have to start having environmental circumstances that give us the opportunities to get to know them on a deeper level. And what I mean by that is that it's not enough to just go on dates over a cocktail. Like, I really, really promote people going on walking dates or activity dates where you're more side by side with each other talking, even on first dates, especially, instead of like being across from each other, because, you know, your eyes will naturally look around. And when you're sitting in front of a stranger, it turns into an interview. It's really hard to lock eyes with someone you've just met. You know, you don't know this person through a friend if you've met them online. If you've met them through a friend, it can be a little like, oh God, now there's like so much pressure for it to work
Stakes
out.
are raised.
There's a lot of things happening, right? So, and so what I say to people is like, now you have to, the purpose of a first date is to go on a second date. That's it. It's not to determine if you want to have kids with them. It's not to determine if you want to get married to them. It's not even to determine if like their politics or religion align with you. Just, did you have a good time with them? Are you still curious about them? Go on a second date. That's it. Now, on a second date, this is where you have to start putting in the building blocks in conversation. So I don't believe in asking questions. Try to have a conversation instead. And a way to do that is to, like, for instance, let's say you want to talk about, I think one of the most important things people could talk about is like their financial lifestyle. And what I mean by that is not like, you know, do you plan to pay for your future kids' education? Do you rent or do you buy? Like, you know, like, you don't need to ask these questions. Instead, talk about what you want. Reveal what you hope for your future to be. So for instance, if I were walking in Manhattan and on a date and I was walking through Chelsea, which is one of my favorite neighborhoods, I would say something like, you know, if I won the lottery, I think it would be my dream to like buy this home right here. And then just saying that, you know, it kind of will instigate another conversation, which is like, they'll say like, really? And I go, no, not really. You know, if I won the lottery, I'd probably pay off my student loans and maybe make an education trust for my kids, my future kids. And in that conversation now, I've just told you that, like, one, I really like Chelsea, but I'm open to doing other sacrifices too. I want to have kids one day. 3, I have student loans, so that's a normal thing. I don't want you to be insecure about it. And 4, I don't want to give that insecurity. You know, I don't want, if I can help it, I don't want my children to experience that. So like, I'm saying so much in 2 sentences. And there is this confidence way of saying it. You know, it's like, no, you're revealing you. And then they get to say like, now, like, oh, you know, I also have student loans, or, oh, you know, I've never thought about that. But yeah, I guess if I had kids, yeah, I think I would want to pay for their bachelor's education if they didn't get any scholarships. But, you know, my kids are going to be smart. They're going to have scholarships. Like, you can learn so much about just having that conversation that's just revealing you and letting them talk. Now, if they're not engaging, that's a different story. That's telling you like, well, maybe this person, you know, you can ask them like, oh, you know, is everything okay?
Yeah. Or you could even say, what would you do if you won the lottery?
Exactly. You can ask these questions too. So there's a way to have date conversations that don't turn into interviews. And again, like for me, like I would talk about money. I would talk about my parents' parenting style as quick as possible, because there's a lot of things that I don't necessarily agree with. You know, my parents were immigrants into this country who came with literally nothing. I don't know if I agree with a lot of the things that they did with, you know, me and my sister. I mean, we were raised well, but, you know, they were also limited to what they could, you know, their best, right? And that was their best. And it's like, okay, what can I have learned? And you know, in me just sharing this with you, I would say this on a date, right? Like, you know, I'm a first generation and this is what it was like. And, you know, see how they react to it. And you know what? I've met men who've discriminated against me when I was dating, when I told them that, you know, I had taken out student loans or that I was Greek. I mean, that was, you know, like, okay, like, okay. You know, like I would get like these very weird reactions.
But you'd rather get those reactions and learn this thing about them sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And I believe people, right? So if people say things that I don't agree with on a core level, I believe them. I'm not going to make excuses for that kind of behavior or that kind of thinking. It's like, okay, great. We're not a match. Like, you know, so, and then from there you can redirect, like, do you want to just have sex with them and just get it over with and like focus on why you're not compatible so you can actually have a proper sex experience? Or do you actually want to date this person and be in a relationship with them? Because there's 2 ways to go about this, or a third way, which is like block them, never speak to them again. You know,
that door's always open.
Always open.
I love this. And I love your point about, you know, just bringing things up in conversation to share things about you, because people always say like, or people always ask me, there's this thing that I'm afraid to tell them. How do I tell them this thing? How do I find out if they want kids? How do I find out if they're okay with
Tell them you want
X
kids.
thing about me? Yeah, exactly. Like you have to communicate. And I would always, talk, just kind of pivot into a story about when I was growing up. And then we would start talking about our childhood and our family and the way we were raised and the number of kids we want. And it would just happen so organically rather than waiting 5 dates to say this thing and find out that we're not on the same page.
I hear from a lot of people, they're like, he didn't ask any questions on the date. And I'm like, okay, why do you want him to ask questions? Like, what do you have prepared answers? Like, is this Jeopardy or something? Like, which that's not the right metaphor, but okay.
It can just be a conversation.
Right. And just reveal. Like, but you know what? That also takes, and this is another thing that we cover in my coaching program, which is like when we fix pickers, which is like, what should you be revealing, right? What exactly is in your core values? Like some people have never thought about, like, for instance, their emotional resilience or their financial well-being or all these things, and like where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are, because it can be very hard to communicate these things if you've never thought about them either, right? If you've never thought about what it would be like if one of your parents got sick and they needed elder care from you, then how are you able to have that conversation with someone? Because I don't know what culture one listener right now that's listening to this is, but in my culture, it's, a lot of elder care tends to fall on the eldest daughter, and I am the eldest daughter. So, I remember when I met my now husband, he happens to be Greek. Which was something I was not looking for, but there he is. And I didn't have to have that conversation with him because he came from the same culture where he knew, like, oh yeah, like if Maria's parents get sick, this is on us to take care of them, right? Just like his sister, who, even though she's younger than him, she is the sister. She'll have to take care of his parents. So there's this sort of, unspoken agreement. But if he wasn't Greek, I would have had to say, like, and I think a lot of cultures share in that too. It's not just me. Like, I mean, I feel like, isn't that like a lot of the premise of Encanto on Disney? Luisa just takes on all the whole burden.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's just, there's things that you want to share about yourself and they might not know to ask the right questions.
Right.
So sometimes you do have to step up. And I think, also you mentioned like, oh, well, they didn't ask me any questions. Not everyone is a good dater.
Yeah.
And if you want them to ask you questions, you can say like, so what do you want to know about me?
Some of the greatest men
are the worst
not
daters.
Good at dating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you know why? Because they're so great that they just know how to get into relationships, and then therefore they've never dated. I think my husband had only like 3 girlfriends before me, and all 3 were like long-term. Like he's never dated. He's never been on apps. He's never gone, like, that was just not who he was. It's like, I remember I had to like really show him a massive green flag. Like, you can ask me out. Like, like I really set it up for him so that he could ask me out. Like, I got his number and was like, tell me, so stupid. Tell me where you're from again, like in Greece, like show me on a map. And he's like, I'm from here. And I'm like, cool, I'm going to save it. And next time I'm there, I'm going to call you to make sure that you're around so we can go for a coffee. And he's like, okay, well, send me and then he goes, that's like the dumbest thing I've ever said, right? Like, next time I'm in a different country with a stranger at the same time, I'm going to call you to go for like, in no world would I ever go to his little street.
Right. But it was like it was showing interest.
Yeah. And then he was like, well, send me your number so I know it's you. And I texted him. I didn't text him my name. I actually just texted him a really cute photo of me that would make him comment like back. And that's what happened. Like I texted him this photo of me with like I was like sipping a cup of coffee and like pinky up sort of thing like this. Mm-hmm. And he wrote back, "You're cute." And that was it. Then after that, we were like, horse at the races. I was like, all right,
fast forward, secure, kids.
It's done. Yeah. And then he asked me, but I was able to kind of like force his hand. I should make a TikTok with the Taylor Swift song, that design song.
Oh, mastermind.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. I should do that today. Because that's exactly what I did. I was like, I knew I wanted him to ask me out. I knew he liked me. I knew he was never going to ask me out. And I
And
had asked
sometimes
him,
you gotta give them a little crutch. You gotta
you
help,
know,
and that's okay.
months later, I think it was like our 6-month anniversary. I asked him like, would you have asked me out if I had not done that? And he goes, yeah, I would have, like a month later. Like I would have messaged you on Facebook Messenger. We would have gone back and forth. Like that was how I did it. And I was like, a month later, like we're in different cities. Either you secure the
And
bag
who knows if
now.
you would have met somebody in that month.
Oh, I had a second date lined up for the following week and I went on it because I was like, I don't know if it's going to work out with this guy. I'm going to go on a second date
Right.
with this other guy. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop dating a guy. Like for any person here who's like, we're exclusive, but he's not my boyfriend. Shut up. If that person has not given you a title and you haven't given them a title, you are free agents. Please date. Do not get off the app.
Yeah. Speaking of titles, that was a great transition. So thank you for knowing
You're
what
welcome.
was on my list without knowing it. I have a few listener questions that I would love for you to help me answer. The first being, the guy I'm seeing wants to be official after 4 dates, but I'm not ready. How can I lighten things up?
Just say, I'm enjoying getting to know you. I'm not there yet. I feel like one time I heard someone say this awesome thing about like, I said, I love you, but he didn't say it back. He just said, listen, we're reading the same book. We're just on different chapters.
Ooh.
And yeah, I love that. I was like, yeah. So,
love that.
I think 4 dates is really soon, but it's also, if you told me 6 dates, I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty normal. So, I think that's great that he's showing you interest and he's communicating it. And that's what you can say. Like, wow, thank you so much. This is so refreshing to have someone be very clear about how they feel about me. I'm not there yet, but I probably will be in a few dates. I'd like to keep getting to know you.
Yeah. And I think that little bit of reassurance of like, I probably will be, or I do want to get there. I think that's really important. And something that, if the roles were reversed and you shared that with somebody and they said they weren't ready, like, I know if it were me, I'd start spiraling, but I would need to know, like, in order for me to be okay and continue, I would need to know that they do want to get there, or they see that there is the possibility. I was actually watching an episode of New Girl last night. I'm like rewatching it as my fall asleep show. And Jess had just started dating. Have you seen New Girl?
Yeah, it's my makeup show when I put on makeup.
Oh my God. I love that. I need a makeup show. Wow. Okay.
It used to be Scrubs, but now
I have not done Scrubs.
Every 6 months, I switch it. So it used to be Scrubs for a really long time. Now it's New Girl. I'm sure the next one's going to be. I always go back to Parks and Rec for 6 months every year.
I love that.
It just tells me like, you've got 22 minutes, Maria. You got to make it happen in these 20. And that's how long it takes me to get ready. 22 minutes.
That is my biggest takeaway from this episode. Even though there have been a lot, I need a makeup show. So she had just started dating this guy. They had been dating for a month. She really liked him. They were exchanging holiday gifts. And he was like, I love it. I love it. I love you. And she said, thank you. And then she kind of panicked and was like, I do really like him, but like, I actually don't know if I'm ready for something serious, but I don't want to like stop seeing him. And she told this to him and he was like, if you don't think you can love me, then like, I can't be in this because it will hurt me too much.
That's an honest answer, but it's also the answer of a child. So, one thing that I advise all women to, if you want a really happy life, stay away from men with like massive egos. So if you were to be honest with him and say like, listen, first of all, I really appreciate your clear communication about how you feel. It is so refreshing. So you acknowledge the gesture and how much courage it takes. And the second step is, I am enjoying getting to know you. I'm not there yet, but I hope to be one day. And if his reaction to that very reasonable response after 4 dates is to be sullen, is that the right word? Is that a word?
I think so. I get what you mean.
Yeah. That is a person with a really fragile ego.
It's a word. Bad tempered, sulky,
like,
gloomy.
Yeah, there you go. So if they're sullen, that's a person with a really fragile ego, because there's a way to like express disappointment, because it's like, oh, really? Okay. All right, we'll go on a few more dates. Or like, well, fine. Like we're just not going to be together. That's a person with a really fragile ego, and it'll show up in many ways in the future. Believe you me, you get that promotion, instead of him popping a bottle of champagne for you, he's gonna be like, great, now I'm never gonna see you again. Like that's not the person I want you to be with.
Nope. And this is sign number 1.
Yep.
Okay. The next question is it okay if I'm seeking an intellectual connection when first matching? That's what I've been looking for, but it never seems to work.
So just to clarify, like she's looking for intellectual connection while swiping?
I guess either, somebody who's gone to a great school or who can have a really like smart conversation on a date.
Right.
And you feel like, oh, this person is either like as smart as me or smarter.
It's funny. A lot of men don't require that in return, right? So I know this is a very heteronormative conversation, so I apologize.
I think it may have actually been a man who asked.
Ooh.
I'm not positive on that.
Okay. So there's like intellectual compatibility is not just like what degrees you have, but it includes a lot of other things, like how you value things in your environment. Or even right now, we're at the time of recording, we're about a week before election day. So for a lot of people in the United States, our morality views are tied into our politics, which is not the case for a lot of other countries. And so, your intellectual compatibility revolves around your perception of your environment, and your obviously, your intellectual curiosity, your thirst for that, and then also your sense of humor, right? So, it's funny. I have so many anecdotes to like explain what I'm saying. So like, I remember I had a woman who was saying to me, like, she told her friend she wanted someone who was like intellectually her equal. And she's like this really, famous journalist. And they set her up with a neurosurgeon and they just couldn't talk on dates. And I'm not saying that neurosurgeon's dumb or at all. They're very smart, but there's a difference between smart and then someone who's intellectually compatible with you. And it's like funny to me, like how her friends translated what she was saying. So to me, let's take a step back. When people think about degrees, like I have a master's, so they should have a master's. I would tell you that like there's other ways that people quench their intellectual thirst that not necessarily have to be in degrees. And I'll give you an example. One of my friends, he might actually listen to this podcast. He always listens to stuff that I'm on. He works as an HVAC technician, but he also reads the newspaper every day and he likes watching documentaries. So yeah, he went to a trade school. He is zero debt. He was able to save money throughout his 20s. He bought a multifamily home in his early 30s. And he rents out 2 of the apartments. He lives in the 3rd one. I'm sure he's going to buy another apartment pretty soon. So financially, he's doing very well. And he has equity. And intellectually, he's told me one of the biggest struggles that he has in dating is that like people immediately think that, oh, he must be dumb because he has a trade. And it's like, no, I just didn't happen to get a bachelor's degree. Right. There's other ways that you can, look at look at intellectual compatibility. I have a hack for this. And I usually ask people like, what shows do you watch, especially your comfort shows? And what do you like about it? So I remember it's funny. When I met my husband, he had never watched The Office. And that was like my ultimate comfort show. I mean, it was still playing. I think it just ended when we met. But I was like, you've never watched The Office? Like, we have to watch The Office. And I remember like staring at his face in season 1 and 2, because if he didn't laugh at certain moments, I was like, I don't know if we could be together. Like, yeah. And I think for me, the most critical episode is basketball. It's like in season 1. Mm-hmm. I just feel like that's such a critical episode to see, like, does your sense of humor align when you watch The Office? Like, what part did you find funny about this? Yeah. And I think you don't have to necessarily laugh at the exact same things, but there has to be a very complimentary sense of humor, because you're going to be, I look at now, right? Like my husband and I were both on TikTok, and my husband's FYP page is very different than mine. His is like mostly DIY and cooking, and mine is like a cesspool of like current events, political debate, and like, what's it called? Like linguistic history. I'm a big fan. But sometimes he'll send me TikToks, and because he knows I'll enjoy them. And it's true. Like I almost always love what he sends to me, and vice versa. And it's because we tend to laugh at the same things. We also tend to critique the same things. Like we have a lot of the same stances on things that are going around in our world. We also have the same level of empathy. about certain things. And I think these can create like a foundation for intellectual compatibility. And if you don't believe me, there are a lot of people that went to really good schools for really big fancy degrees who
That are
I
really
consider
not
really,
smart.
really dumb or
Yep.
manipulative. And I'm looking
Yep.
at you, Ted Cruz. Anyway.
No, that is an incredible point. And I mean, I think this was the first time I really realized that like what college someone went to didn't matter, or their level of degree like didn't represent their like how smart they were, was actually when I started working at Hinge, because there were multiple people there who I found out probably a year into working with them that they actually didn't go to college.
Right.
And they were some of the smartest people that I had ever met. And I was like, wait a second, holy shit. And yeah, not everyone can afford to go to pay for a private institution that might be like an Ivy League or something like that. And they might go to a, public school in their state and pay in state tuition.
Right.
And we shouldn't be like judging people based on that. I think, what happens when you're together and the things you're able to engage with each other on, I think is so much more important.
I also think I'm starting to see like lately the intersectionality between what people perceive as intellectual compatibility and what is classism. And I've only started noticing that with, and I'm sure you've had these people as guests on your podcast, but like the rise of influencers who give dating advice. A lot of those influencers, they come from extreme privilege. And I don't mean just, wealth from their parents, but also they have thin privilege and pretty privilege. And that makes dating extremely different from the typical person who might not have been raised in wealth, who might not have been. And in fact, I remember one influencer, she had said, that for her, a massive deal breaker is a man who still has a roommate over the age of 27. And I was like, wait a second.
Not everyone can afford to live alone, especially in a place like New York.
Right. But to me, that's now class structure, right? Because I think, like, for instance, when I was dating, and I only realized this like in the last year with these discussions that were coming up with influencers, was that like, okay, so I happened to get a scholarship for my undergraduate degree. For my master's degree, I had to get a lot of student loans. And we're talking about like 6-figure debt. For a degree that I don't think I use. So I remember when I was dating, the guys that would be really turned off by that were people whose mindset was like, not necessarily like, why did you get the student loans? But like, oh, you come from a family that couldn't pay, like couldn't just take that on. And I'd rather date someone who comes from a family where they would have paid your master's education as well, even if it costs $160,000. And that's a class structure. That's classism in America. It's, it's a little bit more nuanced, but that's how it comes out. So there are a lot of people who are very insecure about, and I say this a lot, there are a lot of people who are insecure about their student loan debt. And I'm telling you, you shouldn't be. It's just a way to figure out, if your core values are aligned. You wanted an education and you took the loans necessary to get that education. Some people, it's not that they don't want your debt, they don't want your family. Mm-hmm. And you shouldn't take that personally. That's a them problem. That is not a you problem.
Do you watch Love is Blind?
I don't watch dating reality TV. Is it that? I've heard a lot though, but what's happening?
So I just think it's really interesting because these are people who have literally never met. Within a week or two, they are engaged and suddenly they're learning all of these things about each other. And I find it really interesting specifically about student debt because that is a conversation that they all, I guess the producers maybe tell them like, okay, this week you're having a conversation about finances, like make sure you have that conversation. And because they all end up talking about it, but it's so interesting to see how each partner reacts to someone sharing that news that they have student debt and that, they can like, they're set up to afford to pay it off on their own in however long, or, some of them are saying like, okay, don't worry. Like that's something we're going to take on together. Like I support you in that. Or one person this season is about to go get a master's degree and the woman that he's engaged to does not want to help with that financially and expects that because he's going off to another city to go to school, he's still going to pay for her apartment in the original city while he's still paying like his student loans that he currently has and now paying for this master's education. So there are so
It
many
doesn't seem
different
like a
things.
team, you know?
Right.
So much of what
Exactly.
marriage is a business partnership. And,
Yeah.
you know, your debt is my debt and your assets are my assets. And, you know, I've shared, you know, I remember even when I met my husband like 6 months after I graduated. So 6 months into paying off my loans. And when that conversation came up, which I think it came up in like the first 3 weeks of dating, like, oh yeah, I have student loans. And I was nervous about it because there were guys who just didn't, you know, that was maybe one of the, I don't think it was a core reason, but it was one of the reasons, right? Because it is a class identifier for people. I think in New York, where class structures are a lot more obvious than in other parts of this country. And I told him, like, look, I have these student loans. Here's what I do every month to pay them off. Here's what I'm expected. Here's the payment plan I'm on. I share this with my husband every year as well. So it's like, you know, he doesn't, it's already part of our expenses. Like he doesn't, and also he came, you know, on his end, you know, he got a PhD and he got paid for that PhD because, you know, we have a shortage of engineers in this country. So he didn't come with any debt. So it's like on his end, he's like, well, we could have been a couple where both of us are in debt, or we just have one. And, you know, but he doesn't, you know, it's just, I pay my personally, I've always paid off my student loans out of my paycheck before it gets deposited into our joint checking. So it's money he's never even seen, right? It's never been like thought of like, oh my God, we're, you know, it just doesn't even hit
Like,
our
why'd you
account.
take this out of the account? Like,
right.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's just not in the radar.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so important to really like express what situation you're in, and how someone responds to it really tells you so much about them and about if they're the person you want to be with.
Right.
Yeah.
And it also tells
Okay.
me a lot about like, you know, to go back to like how this even came up was like, I have noticed the rise of influencers who give dating advice, and, you know, how much of that dating advice is based on their own experiences versus like what the science says and what, you know, other proper dating experts that exist say. Because, you know, there are, like, I'm personally certified and I have mentors and I'm involved in a lot of studies. Like I do different things to come up with the stuff that I say, you know, it's not just here's my own experience. I will use sometimes my own experience as an anecdote, but there's other things to consider here.
I could go on about this for so long. I have a lot to say, but yeah, I mean, I do see, you know, also a lot of influencers saying like until you're in a relationship, like if you're a woman, you should never once pay for any date. Don't even offer. Like they should be treating you for every single one. It's like not everyone can do that.
That's really tough.
And in my experience, I personally would feel uncomfortable with that. And like I owed them something. And I just think it's really never black and white like that. And yeah,
or if you do that, say thank you. And I think a thank you text after the date is a really nice gesture too. Even if you don't see each other again, it's still a win-win.
You're allowed to
in
send
my
thank
eyes.
you texts without
yeah,
a doubt.
You're absolutely allowed to send thank you texts. I think they're such a win in any way you look at it. But also, you know, it's okay. Look, what men don't like is the fake purse grab because that's annoying. Yeah. Right? It's like you're not really offering, you're just doing the fake purse grab. So instead, you know, if you want him to pay on the first date, when the check comes on the first date, you don't go for the fake purse grab. When he goes the check, you just immediately say, thank you so much for dinner. Let me, you know, that's it, period. Now, if he's hesitating, you could say, let me know if you'd like to split it, or, you know, do decide what ownership you want on this. But I highly recommend on like a second or third date, like, oh, I want to treat you to this one. Like, oh, you know what? Let's stop for ice cream after this. I want to treat you. Do the treat word. People like being treated. People will be like, oh, that's such a nice gesture. She's so sweet. She clearly wants this to work.
Yeah. It also shows that little aspect of like partnership. We're a team.
Right.
It goes a long way.
Yeah.
Maria, thank you so much. I don't want our hour to be over, but it is. I will have to have you back because there's so much more for us to talk about. But thank you so much for coming on. Where can everybody find you? And if there's anything you want to shout out, let the listeners know. Now's the time.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me. I would love to come on again. It was really great talking to you. Now, in terms of where to find me, you can find me on Instagram. I'm at Matchmaker Maria, and the link in my bio has links to all of my stuff. So if you want to join my database, there's a link there. If you want to join me on an upcoming Agape Intensive, there's a link there. And if you want to join me in Greece next summer, because I'm hosting a retreat there again, you can click the link there too. So there's all those links in the link in my bio on Instagram. You can also visit my website, agapematch.com. And I'll be there.
Amazing. Thank you again so much to everyone who listened. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to follow Matchmaker Maria. I can't speak. Follow Matchmaker Maria. Share this. I actually can't speak. Maybe this is the right time for this episode to be ending. Share this episode on your story if you loved it. Send it to the group chat. Send it to a friend who would love to hear it. And tune in next time. All right. Thanks, guys.